Hey there YouTube, it's 118 Seth Shadow here. So, this time I'm going to do a discussion on Neonectar's Arboros Dragon ride chain. This is the deck that I'm currently using. It's not a deck profile, this is just going to be a discussion. So, Arboros Dragon is a ride chain consisting of 4 grade 1, 4 grade 2, 4 grade 3, and a starter. The ride chain is one of the more recent ride chains where if you ride the grade 1, the grade 0 lets you take a look at the top 7 for the grade 2 or 3. Ride the grade 2 and the grade 1 activates if the grade 0 is in soul. And then grade 3, same backwards, activate the 2 if the 1 is in soul. Arboros Dragon's ride chain is overall get the grade 2, 3, call out another unit, call out another unit. And then you can activate the limit break at 4 damage, which allows you to power up your units. I'll go into more specifics as I go along. For Arboros Dragon, getting a hand of a certain series of grade numbers is a bit more crucial than other decks, because that allows you to capitalize more on the Arboros Dragon's abilities. Because the ride chain states, when you ride up to the grades 2 and 3, what you have to do is call out another unit from your deck that has the same name as another unit that's in your rear guard. So, when you start off the ride chain on your first turn, you should also have another unit out in your rear guard. Another unit that is not your starter. Because your starter has no other copies in your deck, and on top of that, your starter needs to be in your soul for this whole thing to work. So, as per that, I run 4 copies of most of the cards in this deck. Or if I can't, then I at least try to run 3. Because this deck really requires you to run a dedicated series of units for its maximum efficiency. Arboros Dragon's limit break. Let's go into more detail about this. The ability is, all your Neonectars get this continuous ability. If you have a unit with the same name as this unit on your Vanguard or your rear guard, this unit gets plus 3,000. Now, mind you, this is not an ability just given to Arboros, it's an ability given to all your Neonectars. So, let's take Corolla Dragon. Read the ability as if you're reading it on Corolla Dragon. So, imagine this is not Sephiroth, this is Corolla Dragon. During your turn, if you have a unit with the same name, it'll get 3,000. In other words, if you have a Corolla Dragon, and you have another Corolla Dragon, and you have Limit Break, each Corolla Dragon gets this ability, and because there's another Corolla Dragon in the rear guard, aside from itself, they will each get 3,000 more power. So the goal with Arboros Dragon is to get a field of similar units, and as a result, power up those units due to the limit break. The ideal field is probably going to be 3 Corolla Dragons in the back row and 3 Sephiroths in the front row. With that, all your columns get a plus 6k upon the limit break. But let's do a bit of exploring here. While that may seem like the ideal situation, it may not always be, especially if you're taking on cross rides. If you do the math, Corolla Dragon plus 3k ends up becoming an 11k booster. Arboros Dragon will become a 13k beater in the rear guard, and if you had the ride chain set up, a 14k Vanguard. 11 plus 14, which is going to be your Vanguard column, at best will hit 25. As a result, this is not going to hit for higher magic numbers against cross rides or 11ks, but it will hit the magic number of 25,000 against 10ks. Which is also why I run this. which is also why you might want to run this. Caramel Popcorn. Caramel Popcorn allows you to counterblast 1, and then it'll get plus 1k for every counterblast. With, let's say, 3 caramels as your boosters, they become 10k boosters. So, with Arboros Dragons in the front row, that would make 23, 24, 23. If you're facing a 9k Vanguard, you really have a lot of flexibility there where you can just counterblast once for each of the rear guards, and they instantly force another 5k shield off the Vanguard. If they're 10ks, you would counterblast, let's see, 2 times for each of the rear guards and 1 time for the Vanguard. And then if it's a 26k, you would need to counterblast 3 times for a single rear guard, and you can also counterblast twice for the Vanguard if you want. That way you can push for much higher numbers and force more shield off the opponent as a result. Caramel Popcorn is actually a very good tech in this deck, and run it 4 actually makes it very good for Arboros Dragon. Just because of the fact that this deck, as you can see, runs very, very little counterblast material. Caramel, Glass Beads, and Maiden of Trailing Rose are the only cards in here that require counterblasts. And the max you're going to use is 2 for Glass Beads. The others are just 1. And technically there's Mina, but she's just a counterblast 1 and there's only 1 of her, at least for this. If you're planning to run Mina, of course. But overall, yeah, the deck is not counterblast heavy at all, so you can spare allocation for Caramel Popcorn to push for higher numbers and force more guard off your opponent. If you cannot ride Arboros Dragon, Maiden of Trailing Rose is a pretty good alternative. It's an 11k Vanguard and it has its Persona Blast ability, so if you couldn't get the ride chain off, if you get the Persona Blast off, you can at least start developing your columns for Arboros Dragon, most likely. Unless you're as unlucky as I was on a tournament on Sunday. I won this game, but the problem was I Persona Blasted, and all 5 of my cards were these guys. 5 triggers. Just a fun notice. I still won that game, but I took a -1 for nothing. So the overall pros of Arboros Dragon: high number pushing. Against cross rides, it can possibly hit, I guess what it would be called, Stage 1, which is just a 5k shield, Stage 2, which is 10k, Stage 3, which is 15. Arboros Dragon can hit for Stage 4 with Caramel Popcorn more often than not. But at the very least, it can hit Stage 3, and it can force 15k out of cross rides in all 3 columns if the field is Caramel Popcorns and Arboros, or Corolla Dragon and Arboros. It will force 15k shield off a cross ride on every column. So the main purpose of this deck is high raw power, just to force extra shielding off the opponent. The biggest problem is not being able to set up columns of ideal cards. If you cannot at least get any units out with the same name, Arboros Dragon's Limit Break is going to suffer pretty heavily, because you won't get any boosting, which means it's just going to be an overall vanilla deck. You'll still have your counterblast options, so Glass Beads and Caramel Popcorn can still push for higher stages of shielding, and it can at least get you more cards. The deck, as I said, is not counterblast heavy, so you have more options in that sense. The other weakness is Arboros Dragon is one of the few limit breaks that can be cancelled. If you play Great Dayusha and you're at 4 damage, I'm sure you know about this, and I'm sure you were crying when you lost the crit off a heal trigger. This ability is a continuous ability. So if you're at 4 and you heal, your limit break instantly shuts off. In other words, if you're at 5, you usually don't have to worry about this, but if you're at 4 damage, pray to God you do not get a heal trigger. Because if you do, you're going to lose those magic columns. And they'll all go down to regular columns again. Those are pretty much the only big things about Arboros Dragon. Oh yeah. The other big weakness, I guess you could say, I don't even know if you could call it a big weakness, but you really have to dedicate your deck space to playing a lot of units with the same name. Otherwise, the effectiveness of Arboros Dragon is going to plummet. Because if you try to play a lot of different cards in this deck, you're not going to be able to get the vast effectiveness of Arboros Dragon. And another big thing, Kagero can destroy this deck. Because usually you're going to want to try and set up a booster column of all 3 units. That way you can get 11k or 10k boosters. If Kagero wipes out even one, if you don't get another one out onto the field, you're going to suffer very heavily. If you get the ride chain off, at the very least you'll be able to have 2. But this is Kagero we're talking about. They can eliminate your rear guard no matter where it is. You have to be very careful when playing against Kagero with Arboros Dragon. Other decks which have the capacity to hit your back row, also you need to watch out for those. So Gwen the Ripper, Berserk Dragon, Death Scythe. You're probably never going to see Gwen the Ripper, but Death Scythe you'll see from Narukami more often than not. So be careful about those. If you think you can't hold a base of back row column, then try to at least get a front row column going. The opponent will be tempted to continuously attack your rear guard, keeping attacks off your vanguard, because they don't want you getting that power boost. Make sure you count your numbers too, because then you can determine whether or not to actually save your units, or just hope for a better field event. Just hope for better numbers later with new cards. And another thing that I actually found effective about Arboros Dragon, try to, if you can't set up 3 overpowered columns, at the very least, try to set up 2 overpowered columns. Your Vanguard column and 1 rearguard column. With that, at the very least, you'll be able to allocate your triggers and possibly keep forcing guard off the opponent from the rearguard column, because it's still very powerful. And even if you can't force guard off, you're probably going to get a guaranteed hit every time off the rearguard column if they block your Vanguard. And if they block your rearguard, most likely the Vanguard will be getting in a hit. It's an effective strategy for Arboros Dragon, just because of the fact that you can maintain a heavy column size for 2 columns more effectively than a single column. So, for instance, let's move over here. I have tried this strategy a few times now, and because I have been unable to set up 3 good columns, I at least try to set up this type of scenario. When the limit break is active, at least with this, you'll be able to hit for higher numbers while at the same time conserve your hand. By leaving 1 column open, you can hold more cards in your hand and just dedicate space to 2 overpowered columns. This way, your opponent will at least have to either be taking damage or forcing out a lot of shield. And this will allow you to keep more shield in your hand too. And even in the event that a unit gets popped out, it's easier to maintain a single column than 2 columns, in addition to the Vanguard. So, if my opponent is not Kagero, obviously they can't hit Corolla, but maybe they're getting pressured to the point where they just can't take these powerful attacks from Sephiroth. So, they keep trying to aim for it. As a result, if I have another Sephiroth in hand, then I can just let Sephiroth die, and then play another one next turn. If the opponent gets rid of that, I can either block it or hopefully just play something else in place. Because this is Corolla Dragons. Oh, an 11k booster is at least going to go for 20k for most of your level 2s. And sometimes you can fake your opponent out. Play the Sephiroth. Keep the 2 column boosting. If the opponent hits the Sephiroth, and you have another more powerful series going, you can play those out next. This will pressure your opponent further. These are just a few strategies I picked up after playing Arboros Dragon, and I guess I'd have to play them a bit more for more effect to adjust their effectiveness a bit more. But overall, they've been effective so far in my playtesting. So they're pointers that I just want to say for options. And that will conclude my discussion on Arboros Dragon. Hope you enjoyed, guys.